So, as I was saying, what we're going to do today is we're going to start taking a look at another type of malware that we're going to do both static and dynamic analysis on. This malware is called brbbot, or brbbot, whatever. Basically, it's a malware that analyzes what's running on your system and then reports back to a command and control server. And we're going to try and understand this and understand exactly what's going on. We're going to use a bunch of tools, so it's always best to have your environment set up inside of Azure. Of course, you can use your local host instance of Flare and Remnux. That is up to you. But you do need an environment where you can communicate between the Flare VM and server processes running on Remnux. So that's why I recommend using the Azure Lab. Once you have started up your virtual machine, you can then connect to it using RDP. As always, the password is what we've talked about before. Because I post these videos to learn, I'm very reluctant to supply the username and password. I'm sure you all got the email from Microsoft over the weekend that it changed its certificates from a CA to a TLS. Shouldn't really impact what we're doing here. Maybe you'll have less connection errors going forward. But this is what you want, okay? We are going to be using Flare and we are going to be using Remnux. We are only using Remnux for today. So for today's class, please start up your Remnux instance. Okay. As we saw last time, it's not advised that you make your Remnux full screen because it doesn't resize nicely back from that. So hopefully it won't do it to me again. As always, the usernames and passwords are stored in the passwords.txt file, so you should be able to find them. For Remnux, the username is Remnux and the password is malware. I will try and use the password malware as much as possible for this class. When I'm distributing viruses contained inside of zip files, again, the password is probably going to be malware for those zip files. And that's pretty standard in industry. So much so that it's become a problem. When virus researchers share viruses with each other to prevent problems from antivirus systems intercepting and removing, they would password protect the viruses that they use. More often than not, the password was malware. Now some of the antivirus tools out there actually try the password malware to see if they can actually look at the contents of a zip file, and if they find a virus, they will then remove it. And that's why we have, if you take a look at today's presentation, and by the way, the presentation we're looking at today is BRB malware analysis. If you look at this and you take a look at slide 2, we talk about grabbing the virus again off of one of my servers at P306, and then the password for the virus is malware. Okay? And that's what we're going to do. But first we need to grab it. But before we do that even, we need to have a directory structure for our proper workflow. So I'm going to mkdir a directory called brbbot, brbbot. And then I can wget the virus off of my bit project server, no dash, SECU 1009. For some reason I keep wanting to do that, brbbot.zip. And what you want to see is that it has successfully saved the file. All right? This is what you want to see. You do not get a 404 error, you get a 200 error. When I take a look at this, I see a 200 error right here. That says, if you remember your HTML status codes, a 200 is a success. So that's good. I've successfully downloaded the malware zip file. At this point, I wish to unzip it. Are there any questions? It's pretty straightforward. We've done this time and time again. There's nothing new here. All right? So let's move on. At this point, I want to unzip this file. And in Unix, in more recent Unix, it's very easy to do. It's simply the unzip command, br tab is your friend. And when you do that, it says, hey, there's a password. Do you know what the password is? And as I just said, the password is malware. As with most Unix environment, it will not echo back the characters you type in when you're typing a password. So now when I do an ls-al, I have my brbbot.exe and my original zip files. Both are there, both are ready to go. Any questions on that? All right, two things to note. If I get a 200 code, I've probably downloaded the file correctly. If I run unzip and it throws an error saying that the brbbot.zip file is not an archive, then maybe something didn't download properly. Maybe you got a 404 error here, or maybe you got an error when you're trying to unzip. Revisit the command you typed. Okay? Chances are there's something wrong with one of the characters that you typed in. If there are problems, just try typing it again. But the problem is that if you type that command a second time and you type it properly, please keep in mind that it's not going to overwrite the original file. Okay? If you get an error up here, and actually, you know what? Let me create that error. Perfect. Let's say I go to download that file, but I mistype it. I don't call it zip, I call it zip because I typed too quickly. When I hit enter, two things happen. It throws a 404 error, but it downloads the file based on that name. When I take a look at that file, it has the 404 error. So even if I type it in incorrectly, the file gets created. It's another test you can do. If something looks wrong, you can take a look at the contents of the file that you downloaded, and it's a simple 404 HTML document. All right? Also, the file size will be very small. If you do an ls, the file size is small. If you do a download and you get a 404 error, you have downloaded the wrong thing. All right? You need to try again, but before you do, you need to remove the failed download and then try again, fixing any typos that you may have so that you get a 200 code. And you don't necessarily want to do this, but if you take a look at the contents of the zip file, it'll look like gibberish. If it looks like gibberish, chances are it's a compressed zip file. All right? Any questions on that? At the end of the day, again, let's revisit this. Once you have it down, it should be about 37K. You want to unzip that file, so it's unzip, tab is your friend, tab is always your friend. When you do that, it says, hey, give me the password, as I said, the password is malware. Are there any questions? All right. Now, we can try vbindiff again. We can go through and see if it reports anything, and if we're very careful, we will see a couple of things, but vbindiff isn't going to give us what we want. All right. We can also do hash brbbot.exe. Take a look. Let's just take a look at PE hash. It wasn't hash, it was something else. It'll give us some hashes that we can then use to research this information. We can do PE hash -a. It'll give us some more hash information. Again, we should take a look at that and see what it gives us. But all of these need to be run against. Let's take a look at that one. Copy it. Go to our VirusTotal website. I'm sorry, it's taking a long time. Should probably start that very early on in the process anyway, because we know we're going to go to this anyway. Go to VirusTotal. We can upload a file, but rather than upload a file, let's just do a search on the hash and see what that gives us. Oh my, look at that. brbbot.exe actually reports that there is something wrong with this file. Of course there is. Okay, we're going to come back on this, but right away we get a pretty good indication that something's wrong with this file. Perfect. We know our research is justified. Let's keep working. Oh, what else did I want to cover before I turn this over? Oh yes, we also used to take a look at something called PE Scanner. And I don't know if you remember, it was a Python script I mentioned very early on in this course when we first started looking at Remnux version 7. And PE Scanner is no longer available. And I took a look at installing it, and a lot of parts are missing to get it to work, and it was a lot of problems. So I reached out to the main creator and maintainer of the brbbot toolkit through Twitter, and I said, what's going on? And they told me that PE Scanner is getting a little old, so they decided to deprecate it, and they replaced it, as you can see on slide 3 of the handout, with PE Frame. And we can use PE Frame against brbbot.exe, and it'll tell us what we have. Takes a little while to run, and it throws out a lot of text to the screen, but it's still worth taking a look at. When we look at this, it gives us a lot of information here. Now, not a lot of it's going to make sense, but right away it comes back with this. It also comes back with a failed VirusTotal reference, but again, it gives us a hash that we can then run against VirusTotal's website. Okay. There was a mention of suspicious. It said, hey, there's something suspicious in one of the text areas of the document. So again, we want to take a look at that information. If you want, you can you can redirect the information of that into a text file. And when you do that, you now have a text file that you can analyze and bring into your report. Okay? Any questions on that? Does that make sense? And nothing here that you haven't already seen, maybe in a slightly different manner, but nothing really brand new. Okay? Now, what I want to do, and I'm just going to show you a failed so you understand what's going on, because last time I didn't think it was going to work and it worked. It might actually work this time. So we're going to try it again. I now need to take this file, this brbbot.exe, and I need to bring it over to Windows to do the next part of my analysis. All right? Let's try that and see what we get. Before we do that, I'm going to jump out of... We're going to do PE string and check out the contents of this file, brbbot.exe. All right. When we take a look at the strings inside of this file, we're looking for interesting information. First off, there's a lot of strings here, and that's okay. There's always a lot of strings in Windows executables. We can handle those. But as we go through and take a look, we have things such as %, and then a list of parameters. Right away, that should draw some attention to us. Okay? What this is doing is it's taking some parameters and doing something with it. And the problem is, it looks like an URL. All right? So this right away is suspicious, and it's going to require us to do a little bit of further following up. Also, there is a temp file that it makes reference to. All right? We have a temp file right here. We have a willingness to do what looks like a possible URL call. Also, it gives us a directory structure. Okay? All of these are going to be important in our analysis. There's a bunch of other stuff as well, and I don't expect you to understand all of these, and the more you do this, the quicker it will become for you to ignore. First off, a lot of these really short strings, they don't help us. Okay? So we go all the way back to the top of this file. A lot of these short strings really don't help us all that much. Okay? But as we go through and we see some of the longer strings, they can help us target what we need to do next. And it's just like the pen testing stuff we did last semester. I'm going to have you focus on the important bits and use those going forward. Are they always going to be this easy? Of course not. This is just the beginning of the process. Okay? When you start getting into the longer strings, that's when things get interesting. Those look like standard Windows memory errors or environmental errors, programming errors. Those just look like maybe collections of characters for different things. But there's a temp file. So it wants to create a temp file, or it wants to use a temp file. We need to remember that. It looks like it's doing a URL call. We want to remember that. And then it has this directory structure here, and it's calling itself, brbbot. We want to remember that as well. Okay? So some clues that we're looking for, information we may want to keep, or we may want to put in our report. And I'm going to ask you to put those in the report as you're doing the work today. Okay? Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Brilliant. Let's move on. Now that I've done all the static analysis that I can, that I'm going to, it's not all the static analysis that I can from this environment. That was actually a very inaccurate statement. Now that I'm done what I want to do with regards to static analysis in Remnux, what I want to do next is move this over to my Windows VM. So I might as well start it up right now. And I'm going to try and use the Python simple HTTP server module to see if I can't upload from Remnux using that. So pwd, I'm in my brbbot directory, perfect. So Python -m simple HTTP server, and it'll create a simple server on port 8000. If this is going to work, then I can simply open up a browser in my Flare VM, navigate to that website, and download whatever files I want for my analysis. Unfortunately, it's not going to work, I don't think. And I think it has something to do with how Windows wants to do gateway stuff. That's fine. That's a good size to use. I'm just going to use the default. The Flare user password was Flare admin. All lowercase, Flare _admin. Again, if you don't remember, you've got your passwords file right there. Now that I'm connected, it doesn't have internet connectivity, and this is really what's going on here, is it doesn't have internet connectivity. I need to verify, however, that it does have an IP address, so I'm going to fire up my browser, and I'm also going to fire up my my command window. When I check out ipconfig, I'm on the 192.168.56.102 network, but I'm not attached to the internet. And this is how you must have Windows running. Okay? After you have set up Flare, after you set up Windows, isolated the network, set up Flare, at this point, you should not connect to the internet anymore. If you want to talk to any machine at all, it should be on what we're going to call our host-only network. I don't think I can make my font bigger, I apologize. And it should be the same network that we have our Remnux on. My Remnux IP is 101. My Flare is 102. Okay, and that's what I want. That's exactly what I want. Okay, so at this point, I can then try connecting to my 101 address, 192.168.56.101, port 8000. Okay? Because Windows doesn't like the way that we've set up this network, Windows is not going to be happy with that. Even if we try Firefox, I don't think Firefox is going to be happy with that either. Ah, Firefox liked it. Wow. Okay. Again, an entire... If you take a look at the presentation, and you know what, we're going to go through this. I'm going to capture this just so you can see, because this doesn't always work. It's worked here perfect, but as I've told you many times, you need to know different ways to solve a problem. You saw here that Chrome did not like our setup. I used the exact same, I copy and pasted the exact same address from Chrome into Firefox. Firefox was fine with it. Why? It has to do with the way that the gateways are set up for this host-only network. It doesn't know quite how to route the network traffic properly. Google doesn't like it. If Firefox is okay with it and is willing to work with it, we're okay. Now that I've got this, I can save my work locally. Okay? Do not run this in Windows. Right-click, Save Link As, and you want to create a workflow. You've got downloads here. I wouldn't put it in my downloads. I would go to Documents. I would create a new folder. I would call that new folder brbbot.exe. No, not .exe. That shouldn't call it .exe. I should just call it brbbot. Like that. I would go into that folder and save my executable right there. So now, when I go into Windows, I go to my Documents, brbbot, my file is right there. Okay? Now that I have it here, I can launch PE Studio. And when I launch PE Studio, it tells us drag and drop the file into Analyze It. And when we do that, it'll try and perform the analysis for us. And it gives us tons and tons of information, including areas we really need to worry about, things that it thinks might be problematic. Any questions on that? This is a really nice screen capture. It tells us things that we should focus on, including blacklists and things that we should be worried about. It identifies things that it thinks are problematic. It also gives us our strings results as well. We can take a look at, and again, things that it really doesn't like. So again, we can use this to focus specifically on areas that it doesn't like. It doesn't like this. It doesn't like the brbbconfig.temp. So it allows us to right away focus on the specific areas. One thing it'll also do is give us virus total information, but it is blank. Of course it is, because we ensured that we had no internet connectivity. If we turn on internet connectivity, we have a different problem where we're not going to do that. Okay? There's also some DOS headers. If we were to take a look at some of the other files, we might actually see a little bit more information regarding to DOS, because it does a lot of the DOS calls. But again, we can look at the imports. We can sort on different columns. It can tell us the things we need to focus on, including strings. Any questions on that? These are really nice captures that you can add to your report. Any questions? Finally, the last thing I want to talk about, I should have done it before I moved on to Windows, is slide 6 of the handout. Historically, when we took a look earlier, I told you should run clam scan on your tools, and it wasn't working, and it wasn't working. I thought you just needed to do an update. It's much more serious than that. The process of getting ClamAV to work properly in Remnux involves removing everything, doing a cleanup and an auto remove of aptitude, and then reinstalling ClamAV. And we're going to install something called ClamTK, which is a graphical front end to the Clam antivirus suite of tools. So we're going to do this as well in our environment. What does that look like? Well, first, we should have done this originally, but we're going to go back to Remnux. And I've got two different windows going here. One is my website, that's fine. I've got a second terminal running, and I'm not logged in as root, so I can either sudo su-become root, or just do everything through sudo, and that's what I'm going to do. Sudo apt remove clam av. Okay. Apt remove clam tk. You're not going to get this because I've already done these on my virtual machine. But I'm just going to go through the steps, and then sudo apt remove fresh clam. I'm going to let it run. Okay. Well, when you run through these 5 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 steps, it will reinstall ClamAV, and it'll give you a graphical front end to ClamAV as well. And once you've done that, you can then run ClamScan against brbbot.exe. And I really encourage you to do that as well. Okay? I made a mistake. I let it run the fix for my apt or my package management tool in well, in this case it's not Debian, it's Ubuntu. But you should not see this because I've already run those steps in this environment. Was anybody else able to get clam uninstalled? I'm asking now. Does anybody else try running these commands in Remnux? And let me know how it goes, please and thank you. You got the same error I got? All right. Well, I'm just going to show you what it should look like. I'll fix that because now I think about it, I think I ran it locally, not in Azure. So I'll fire it up locally and I'll show you what you should expect. And if it's not working in Azure, then we'll figure out a fix. So it was sudo apt remove clam av. It should go through and remove all the components that are necessary. And then it's sudo apt remove clam tk, which when you run it shouldn't be there. You shouldn't need to remove that. What else is it? Fresh clam. You're probably going to need to remove fresh clam. Sudo apt remove fresh clam. You're going to need to because that's going to be installed. I don't need to because it's not there. And then sudo apt clean. Sudo apt auto remove. And it should clean up the environment. And then once you've done that, then you can turn around and sudo apt install clam av, like that. It'll go in and it'll install it, and then sudo apt install. This is optional, but I think you should install it. Okay. What this gives you is the ability to actually launch a graphical tool for doing scans. Now that you have that, you can then do clam scan on brbbot.exe, and it should report what it's going to find at that point. I'm running it on my VirtualBox Remnux to show you what it should look like. I'm also just killing time to let the Azure catch up to us. Okay? But this is what I want. And it says it's okay. Obviously it's not okay, but that means that we need to update our antivirus. So we type fresh clam, and hopefully it'll be able to update itself. This is what I'm trying to show you. Yeah, that's fine because Clam Daemon wasn't running. So now that I've updated it, let's see if it finds the virus now. It still says it's okay. We know it's not, though. Is this something you want to include in your report? Very much so. ClamScan reported that there were 0 infections. Okay, maybe it's because it's scanning it in Linux and it doesn't see the executable just yet, but it is problematic. All right. This is why I keep showing you multiple tools. I'd like to say I did this on purpose. No. This is why we look at multiple tools. ClamScan, no problems. No problems with it at all. But when we take a look at it inside a virus total, 3/4 of the engines report as something problematic. This is why we do multiple tools and multiple checks on our viruses. Alrighty. This is still running. Once I have a definite, I'm going to keep recording this, and once this is done, I'll show you an update to this. But this is what I need you to do. Clearly there's something wrong with our installation in this environment for it to be complaining this much. I'm trying to fix it. If you want to do what I did, that's fine. But it might not be the, you might just want to let it run its thing and not worry about it, okay? Actually, you probably don't want to do what I was doing in case it breaks it horribly. If it does break it horribly, let me know and I'll issue another VM to you, all right? We are going to talk about creating, what are they called? Watch points or checkpoints? Checkpoints. We are going to talk about creating checkpoints in our next class. We haven't talked about checkpoints yet, but we will talk about checkpoints in our next class. But we're not there just yet. Okay? Any questions? Okay. That's a sample screen capture. Oh, that's what I wanted to do. One of the things that you may want to do going forward is, let's say you still have Windows running here and you've got some interesting things that you're worried about. Most of you are running this inside of Windows. There is a tool called Snipping Tool in Windows. Just start and look for Snipping Tools. This tool is great for doing captures that you may want to embed in a report. Click on New, everything gets grayed out and you can highlight right down to the detail what you want to appear in your report. Some of you just do whole screen captures. That doesn't work for me. Okay, so what I want you to do is to click on the Start menu. Let's say I have this here. I'm just doing this less than full screen so I can show you what I want to do. Click on your Start menu, type in Snip, and it should find the snipping tool. Once you have that, click on New. Everything grays out except for what gets copied. Highlight that, copy it, and then you can paste that image directly into your report. And that's what I would like you to do. I no longer want to see big full screen captures. I want you to focus in on the important information and make sure that that's what appears in your reports. Okay? You can save them, but once you've pasted them into a report, you no longer need to save that image. Any questions on that? Okay, go ahead. There is a report in Learn. No, that's not it. It's the wrong class. Sorry. You're section 1 or 2? Section 1? Okay. In the course content, yes, I have a malware analysis report for brbbot in the same folder where you have the PowerPoint presentation, and I've started some content there. Go in and update that with your own content in that report. I've put this stuff here, but I want you to paste your own stuff in there. Okay? I want you to go ahead and do this. It's not PE Scanner anymore, so this is one way of knowing whether or not it's not PE Scanner, it's PE Frame. So make sure you update this information with your own information. I've got some placeholders there, but I want you to do the work yourself. I want you to fill this in as much as possible, and then starting in our next class, we are going to start focusing on the behavioral or the dynamic analysis. Okay? For that to work, you need to be able to move the malware from Remnux over to Flare. Any questions on that? Okay. the last thing I want to mention before we go any further, when I set these virtual machines up for you, I ensured that we had WinSCP in place. And I also ensured that we had Firefox, because those two tools are critical, and they don't come by default in the Flare installation script. Flare will install Chrome, but Flare, for whatever reason, doesn't install Firefox, and for whatever reason, I don't think it installs WinSCP either. I installed them ahead of time to make sure that these tools would be available to us, and if you're building your own toolkit in the future, install Firefox, install WinSCP, then install Flare, and then disconnect it from the internet, and then you have the tools that you need. Okay? One of the things that this gives us is that if in the future we want to pull files off of another server and for whatever reason the networking won't work for us properly, this is what I want you to do. If you take a look at this SSH service, it is installed, but it is not running. Okay, and that's really, really important. SSH is installed, but it's not running. Q to quit, and I get my prompt back. So if we want to pull files off of Remnux over to, in this case, Flare, and we've done the same thing, by the way. We've done this in Kali in the past. What you need to do is to start the SSH service. It's going to ask for the password. It's malware. And then I should have done sudo because I'm changing the environment. I actually should have used the sudo command, but it recovered from my mistake. That's great. So I can see that it is running. I've got an SSH server running. Perfect. I can now, and just by way of Q to quit, and just by way of remembering IP adder, my IP address is 101. Okay? I can go over to Flare. I can start WinSCP. I can make a new connection to 192.168.56.101. Make sure you turn on your numlock first. What's my username and password going to be? Anybody? What's the username? Go ahead. Exactly. Thank you. I didn't catch who that was, but thank you very much. You can save that. There's value in saving it. And try logging in. It's going to say, do you want the key? Right away, that's a good sign. If it was able to talk to the server and say, here's the key, then that part of the networking is good. It's much more forgiving than the browser network requirements, with the exception of Firefox. And there it is, brbbot. I have my documents here. I can either create or use the BRB directory, and I can simply move stuff one at a time or as needed. All right? So, if you can get the, wait, wrong tab. If you can get the simple HTTP server Python module working, great, that's nice and easy. You can use that alongside of Firefox, and you should be able to download the files. Perfect. If you don't have Firefox available, this might not work, which is why I made sure that I installed Firefox. If, however, Firefox isn't working for you, it's always good to have a backup, which is why I installed WinSCP, so that I could use WinSCP to connect to my Remnux machine. Regardless of using Firefox or using WinSCP, you need to start the service. Just like Kali last semester. Kali by default turns off all of these services to make sure that you don't have these vulnerabilities. It's the same with Remnux. They're not turned on by default. It's probably not for the same reason, but the upshot is the same. So what we need to do is we need to go in and say, hey, start either the Python module or start the service. Oh, maybe that's it. Maybe it's done. Anyway, I'm going to go back here, either that or start the service. And now that I can see it running. Once you're done, you may want to stop that service, but I'll tell you right now, when you exit out of Remnux and shut it down, it'll stop those services for you. Okay? As always, once you're done, exit, exit, Control C, exit. You can shut down VirusTotal if you want. I don't care quite so much about the browser because that's a stopped process right there. Power off your VM. Very good. It complains that it lost the connection. That's fine. I don't need that connection anymore. Power off, power off, power off, power off Windows. And every time you need to do this. Every single time. Shut down. Before you shut everything down, go into your hypervisor manager and make sure that the state of all your VMs is off. Perfect. Shut down the Azure VM. And once you've done all that, go back into your labs. You may have lost your session. Log in again. And toggle off your lab. Okay, every single time. If you don't do that, in 1 weekend you'll burn through all 100 hours that I've allocated for you. All right? Are there any questions? Does that make sense? Okay, so please go ahead and do that now. Go in, download the virus, and do your analyses. I should have tried the... don't do the clam scan just yet. If you have a local host, you can try doing the clam scan there. If you're doing local, not local host, but local on Windows using VirtualBox, that should work fine. I'm going to work through the error on Azure right now and see why it was throwing that problem. And then I'll produce a little video on that. But at this point, that's it for now. I'd like you to spend the remaining hour trying to get through that workflow and making sure you can do that. Some of you are going to get it just like that. That means the rest of the time is going to be a lab. Those of you that are struggling, I want you to understand that workflow because that's what we're going to use going forward. Are there any questions?